Every child is a gift and a challenge, and a so-called gifted child is a special kind of a gift and a special kind of challenge. After all, the gifted kid has got, almost by definition, the greatest potential to contribute to society, has more options career-wise. It's going to be, so you feel a greater sense of responsibility, perhaps, unless you're one of those foolish parents who think that gifted kid's going to do fine on his own. Yeah, less likely to fall into the total pit of failure, but without some reasonable guidance, is most likely to have a huge deficit in terms of what they could have been if you had been reasonable. And I mean reasonable, being pretty smart, and that's what I'm going to talk about here on the show. If you were doing a decent job, a good job of parenting versus not. But let's start first with definitions. What does it mean to be gifted, or in these egalitarian times, even bright is seen as obsessive, is seen as excessive, elitist, separatist, divisive, all those words that the left likes to use to denigrate merit and reduce things to discussions of race, gender, class, sexual orientation, income inequality, whatever, anything other than to look at merit, which makes me sick. Anyway. In any case, what does it mean to be a gifted or even a bright child? It means being at least above average in the ability not just to learn and memorize, that's usually the prerequisite, but not the sine qua non of the gifted kid, but the ability to reason, to abstract, to take those bits of knowledge and put them together and analyze them and synthesize them in clever ways and come up with good questions, good ideas, good projects. And that usually, notwithstanding the myth that, there are these verbal geniuses and mathematical geniuses and artistic geniuses, there's a remarkable amount of actual intercorrelation when you just don't rely on the subjective crap of the multiple intelligences, which has been utterly not supported by empirical data of what really counts are the factor analyses, how intercorrelated are these so-called different intelligences. There really is, while it's not a perfect correlation, there is this one unitary intelligence called G. It's a statistical thing, but it ends up being inordinately, it's the single most predictive factor in terms of one's ability to be productive in the intellectual sphere, not in terms of manual labor or memorization, but in terms of professional level work, doing well in school, etc. In any case, those tend to be moderately to highly intercorrelated across the visual and performance space. While we all know there are some dumb people who are excellent musicians and athletes, but in general, the key thing in intelligence, in being bright and gifted especially, which is defined by high scores in many ways on SAT scores, student achievement tests, IQ scores, they intercorrelate very highly. IQ has gotten a bad rap unfairly, really, in terms of actual predictive validity for people of all races, but this is all part of the wild egalitarian press, so that ideology trumps solid data. In any case, so we've even changed the name of the SAT, which used to be a standardized aptitude test, to mean call it the standardized achievement test, because achievement implies less genetically and endowed abilities, less preordained abilities from genetics and early environment. In any case, it's the above average ability to make connections, logical, to learn quickly and use those to analyze, synthesize, and ultimately to create and solve problems. In other words, create meaning, identify problems, solve problems. So even in the art domain, the person who is brilliant at copying is no genius. That's a workman. That's workman-like work. The genius is somebody who can take into account all kinds of factors and things and aesthetics and rationality and design ideas and everything and incorporate it into a unique, beautiful whole. That's the genius. or the gifted, or whatever you want to call it, person. So now let's turn to you as the parent. It's probably not kids watching this or listening to it if you're listening to it on my podcast. Well, there is variation across all kids. Generally, kids who are above average in intelligence are able to use that to, in general, make good choices. And of course they're going to make mistakes. They're going to fall out of a tree and break their arm. They're going to watch too much video game because they're addicted to the particular game. But net, the benefits of allowing a kid to pick what he or she is going to want to do in his or her discretionary time, including leaving plenty of unstructured time. Helicopter parents are nuts in trying to overschedule their kid. It's worth the errors that the kid is going to make by allowing that kid the self-efficacy of making that freedom of choice. He or she is going to choose often more wisely than we could choose for them, and can survive the mistakes, but can't survive being micromanaged, or can't survive as well. I remember the most vivid example was a kid who was, quite genius, quite brilliant. Not genius is too strong. She was, 140 IQ kid, quite bright, and academically motivated. And yet, in some of her discretionary time for quite a while, she would, after her long day of school, would sit and knit while watching cartoons. Now, that's something the parent wouldn't have chosen for her. Certainly wouldn't have scheduled that into for time to be spent doing that. But that was what that kid needed and wanted. The kid is a person. He's not just a machine. This happened with a girl. She has some right to discretion, right to some simple pleasure. Decided, I need some rejuvenation, some restoration from all that thinking. I'm not saying I'm a genius, but I do know that I, for example, will take time to clean the house as a mindless, concrete activity that is restorative. Where I wouldn't allow my kid more than advisory input would be in choosing a school or choosing a class. In today's egalitarian era, ability group classes and even most ability, schools for the gifted have been eliminated in favor of egalitarian mixed ability classes, even though bright kids sit stultified so much of the time and are put into indentured servitude, being tutors to the slow, denying them the right of their appropriate level education. But that's the reality of today's world, and the world that it is ever acceleratively redistributive, especially as we're going to see the new administration going to do ever more to take from those who are the brightest, greatest contributors to give to those who are the least. Not just in our schools, but in who we tax and how much we tax. It's the thing that makes me saddest in this world. In any case, there's still some discretion a parent has in choosing a school or choosing a class. Some schools do have a higher proportion of gifted kids or bright kids, so the schools are forced to be more accommodating to their needs rather than just serving the bottom, which has been so often the case in so many public schools now. Even in middle-class schools. They just focus on the bottom. Special ed, other low achievers. But there are certain schools and certain teachers within schools who do well, or at least reasonably, by bright and gifted kids. I wouldn't let my kid have control over choosing the school or the class, because the kid, even if very gifted, very often is going to choose to want to be with his or her friends, even if it means being bored in class. But that's too big a price to pay. 6 days a week, 5 days a week, 180 school days, often for years, sitting bored or not living up to one's potential. Believe me, I'm not talking about the silly academic rigor of pushing harder and harder, deeper and deeper, but more thoughtful, more challenging, more intellectually interesting work is a child's right, a bright child's right, just as a slow child has the right to have their instruction beyond their level. So that's where I'd kind of restrict. I would certainly discuss the issue with my child, but I would retain final say. And that's a critical thing, I think, as a good parent. An underutilized option, especially in today's egalitarian era, for the quite bright child is grade skipping. The conventional wisdom among the egalitarians is, oh, but the social life's going to suffer. Whatever decrements exist are more than countered by the fact that the kid is getting stimulated at his or her appropriate level all day, every day, or much of the day. It doesn't have to be all constantly, of course. We're all bored sometimes. The keys to mitigating any negatives are indeed to find a teacher 1, 2, 3 grades even ahead who's appropriate in terms of your child's academic level, who's eager to have your child, and then have that teacher pair your child with a nice, bright, popular kid who can then kind of help your child meld into the classroom, teach the kid the ropes. You know, for bright kids, especially active kids, school is a nightmare. Today's school is a nightmare. And they're not even aware of it because kids don't have a comparison. They just think that's what school is. And so when you just hear them say, I hate school, you just think, it's just the same old stuff. But it's worse today, much worse for the bright kid. Because so much of the attention in public schools is faced on the lower achievers and lowering the achievement gap. It's, of course, the fastest way to reduce everybody to the lowest common denominator is by teaching to the bottom. But that's what we do. We set up this common core that sounds hard, but then if you go into the classrooms and you see what's really going on, there's tremendous focus on low achieving kids. Because it's hard for a teacher to see the kid painlessly go slowly and not learn. And the teacher's been guilt tripped into saying it's our fault that we are not prioritizing closing the achievement gap. So it turns to you as the parent to get your kid into those increasingly uncommon classes where a bright kid can get his or her needs met reasonably. I want to talk a little bit about after-school activities that build on strengths. Many, and this is the cliche, but many middle-class parents of bright kids feel this obligation to give their kids music lessons. Now, this is something that I do know a lot about. And it pains me to see kids, bright and not bright, be forced to do this incredibly laborious, repetitive process of learning what these squiggles mean and translating that into what you do on your fingers. It is a useless exercise. It is useless because it doesn't have transferability to overall thinking skills, and it does not turn somebody into being a good pianist or a good whatever. Because the real goal of 99.99999% of people who take music lessons would be to be able to sit down, say, at the piano and just easily toss off some tunes at a party or whatever. Well, that's less likely to happen because of the lessons. Because the lessons train your eye to translate what's on those squiggles of paper into your fingers. Your ear gets atrophied. It's shortchanged in the process. So I'm a professional pianist. If you can Google me and the word piano, you'll see what I mean. And I can't read music, but I sure can play by ear. Because I learned to develop my ear by simply plunking out Mary Had a Little Lamb and chopsticks, making wrong note after wrong note after right note, getting feedback each time until I learned what sounded good. And I was able to play ever more complexly, ever more complexly, ever more complexly. And that enables me to sit down at the piano and play whatever I want effortlessly, which I suppose is not a bad thing for me to do. So I'm going to play just a minute of something because I'm just going to play what people... The most iconic song, I'll play a little Over the Rainbow. There you go. Okay, I'll just play a little. Again, never seen the music. If I played it 20 times, I'd play it differently. I can play it in any key. come back, I'm going to talk about college choices, options other than college for the gifted and bright kid, career issues, and then a little ode to parents of gifted kids. Stay with me. Thank you for staying with me. Let's see here. So, let's talk a little bit about college. It's been an article of faith forever that almost all, increasing number of kids, even no matter how quite deeply we dig down into the high school barrel, should be going to college. It's certainly been an article of faith for bright kids and gifted kids. But increasingly there's been a chink in that everyone to college armor, as we're seeing more and more data that say that kids don't necessarily grow, certainly don't necessarily find rewarding employment for all that money and all that time spent going to college. So if I had a bright or gifted kid, now sure, if my kid really loved school, was not at all burned out after 12 years of sitting in the classroom, and was eager to go to college because of for the right reasons. Terry, I hope you'll edit this out. Around 17. Anyway, okay. So, if my child was really eager to go to college, not just to hang out, get away from me, but was really eager for more academic learning as well as the extracurriculars and the full college experience, I would support that. But before accepting that standard route, I would have a full discussion with my child about a far fuller range of post-high school options. Everything from deferring from a year so they could have some real-world experience, either starting their own business or a nonprofit or working at the elbow of an ethical craftsman or an ethical entrepreneur, to be honest, if I had a gifted kid, I probably wouldn't encourage the military because it's so conformist. It kills the spirit of a gifted kid who's all about creative ideas and thinking and not rule following, let alone absurdly demanding physical fitness standards. That's not to mention the risk of getting the kid his head blown off. I would not encourage my kid to go to the military. So I don't think I'm necessarily anti-war. I'm in favor of wars while fully aware of the horrible costs of war, the potential benefits, and I would, again, like with everything else with my gifted kid or with anybody else, try to inject a measure of nuance into every decision. But in any case, we would explore the full range of options, whether it be a 1 year, as I said, a hiatus, a year in between, what do they call a timeout year, bridge year, or even just permanently deciding that that my child just says, I'm a self-starter and I've got enough moxie. I'm going to do my learning on my own. I'm going to go find a job or start a business, and I'll do individual reading or individual taking of courses on my own to supplement on a just-in-time basis that which I need to know for my job. As absurd as it sounds, and it probably would be risky, but I think I was meant to be a genetics researcher. But I hated school. It was so laborious, so long, so much irrelevant stuff, so expensive, that I probably would take the risk. I know this was going to destroy whatever credibility I might have. I would have dropped out of high school, probably after the 8th or after the 9th grade, something like that, and then talked my way into a job washing bottles in some research lab, and watching and asking questions and learning and writing and reading and taking individual courses, and try to become an independent scholar, what they call an autodidact. If it failed, then I would probably then say, oh, well, I tried. I'd probably go to college and major in molecular biology or genetics. But see how far I could get with as little education. I know that the standard route, 90-95% of people go the traditional route, bachelor's, PhD, etc. But I would try to go the independent route. And that's why I think it's really wise to talk to your kid about the full range of options. You know, one of the nice things about being a gifted kid is you've got degrees of freedom. You're able to do more independently than the average kid. The average kid needs the structure of school, the guidance, the school of the not just the school hours and the assignments, but the professor structuring the knowledge for you. They're not much at self-learning. But if we're talking here about gifted kids, so if I were talking to my gifted kid about post-high school options, I would certainly include the full range, and at that age probably, while certainly exert my thoughts onto the situation, I probably would not force my kid to any one of those options. Now I think I want to end by talking about, or move toward the end by talking about career. And just one major aspect. The big dilemma that many people between status and materialism and creative opportunity and freedoms at the same time. The example I like to give is there are many lawyers who are successful, even enjoy the fight, enjoy the case. Sometimes if you're lucky enough to have discretion, be on the side of the good guys, and yet quietly, like ex-lawyers Scott Turow and Scott Grisham, deciding to scrap the prestige. They didn't know they were going to be successful as writers right away, I'm guessing. Very few do. The prestige and the money of being a lawyer, and instead be a writer. There is no magical answer to this question. I simply would want to talk with my gifted kid about the trade-offs, and because the kid is gifted, he's going to have more, or she, of course, is going to have more options in the marketplace. You could always, you can say, okay, do you want to try to find, go for a full-time creative career if that's your thing, being creative? You're a risk-oriented person, you want to try entrepreneurship, or you want to have a stable day job, be the standard lawyer or doctor or researcher, and then as an avocation, play your music, do whatever. Or do you want to use the Bill Gates model, which is to make money where money is to be made, for example, in the software business, and then use your money to do non-profit-y things. I remember a doctor who, very brilliant guy, but even being a doctor ends up being fairly mechanical all the time. You're doing the same things all the time. This guy was a hand surgeon, and yet he totally got into all these wonderful side hobby things, writing songs on the guitar, playing the guitar, become an expert at voice recognition software. And that comprised the interesting life. So that's something I certainly would discuss the full range of options with my many kid, but especially my gifted kid, because they have more options than some other kid who might need a very traditional structured path. And I want to end this by talking about the role of that parent. First, I guess I want to say it's not a matter of quantity time. In fact, the helicopter parent who feels they have this treasure of a gifted kid, they need to micromanage every little aspect of his life and schedule everything and help with his homework all the time or whatever. I believe that does a disservice for the kid. It denies them a sense of self-efficacy. It also denies you your right to your own life. So often parents choose to devote to themselves to their kid. It's supposed ostensibly in the name of their child, for the benefit of their child, but it's really to fill the emptiness in their own life. And the wise parent of a gifted kid or any kid recognizes that parenting is only one of your roles, and you don't want to play it to excess or to be a negligent parent on the other hand, because of your own needs. Quality time is what matters. With a gifted kid, conversations, nuance, erring toward allowing your kid more freedom is going to be, in general, every kid's a little different, is going to be best for the kid and best for allowing you to flower, career-wise, personally, whatever. When you see the range of kids that come into this world, from those with severe physical disabilities, mental disabilities, the vast middle, and then the intellectually gifted. Oh my God, I think back to, was honored to be invited to spend a day talking to kids at the Davidson Academy, which is the nation's only school for the profoundly gifted, where your minimum IQ needed to get in is 145. That's at the 99.5 percentile or something. And that was one of the most exciting days of my life, because to spend time around those kids, I spent a lot of times around really smart adults, but to see those kids at that formative time in their life and interact with them substantively and trying to ask nuanced questions and hear their nuanced questions and have a respectful, nuanced discussion across the map of all kinds of issues, that's a privilege. So if you're fortunate enough to either be the parent of such a child or to otherwise interact with such a child, treat it as one of life's great treasures, because it is. In any event, this is Marty Nemko reminding you that we find comfort among those who agree with us, growth among those who don't.